Okay. Okay, ja ću dati, do you have like headsets? Okay, I think you need one because I'm going to give a couple of information in Serbian. Well, so, yeah. Možemo da dobijemo još 2 uređaja. Zanimljivo. Ok, eto, super, okupili smo se večeras ovde, dakle, ideja je da razgovaramo o internet slobodama i međunarodnim trgovinskim sporazumima, to je događaj koji organizuje Internet društvo Srbije. Pre nego što se upustimo u samu stvar, želim da vam dam par informacija, par tehničkih informacija, pošto sutra ćemo imati jedan događaj koji je povezan sa večerašnjim događajem, gde ćemo da pokušamo da na jedan praktičan način pristupimo tome kako se ljudi organizuju kako bi formirali neku vrstu opozicije ovim sporazumima, dok ćemo večeras pričati pre svega o tome koji su to problemi koji ovi međunarodni trgovinski sporazumi sobom nose. Pored toga, to može da bude takođe zanimljivo i važno, imat ćemo organizovanu jednu radionicu za zaštitu privatnosti u nekakvom hakerskom žargonu. Te radionice su poznate kao kriptožurke. Dakle, osnovna ideja je da osvestimo na koje sve načine zapravo mi ostavljamo svoje lične podatke online. Zapravo to što mi na neki način ostavljamo online često i da u pogledu toga nismo ni svesni se naziva tehnički digital footprint i upravo ta radionica pre svega služi tome da nas učini senzitivnim na taj aspekt našeg ponašanja, a usput ćemo se opskrbiti i nekim praktičnim znanjima kako da imamo bolju kontrolu nad tim digitalnim footprint ili digitalnim otiskom. To bi bile neke tehničke informacije koje sam dužan bio da predočim. Sada bih krenuo da se obraćam na engleskom, pošto većina naših govornika dolazi, ne govori srpski, ali mi smo zato obezbedili simultani prevod, tako da možemo nekako da budemo svi uključeni u ovu debatu. Okay. Okay, let me just briefly describe describe the context that actually motivated us to organize this event. There are like a couple of reasons only, and we thought that's more than enough to have debate of this sort like here in Serbia. First reason is that we haven't spoken much about these trade agreements in Serbia. The only example I was able to find online was concerned with a couple of events that Swedish embassy, together with some state institutions, Serbian state institution, actually they were promoting a couple of years ago TTIP as well, which is like trade agreement, and we will hear more tonight about it. They were promoting TTIP, obviously as agreement that with the idea to create like the unique market, like free market between US and EU. And then they presented it as an additional incentive to Serbia to join EU. What we want to do tonight, we want to somehow tackle some other aspects of these agreements. Actually, we are interested more in figuring out how come that so many people across borders manage to organize so fiercely against these agreements. So, in order to have this conversation here in Serbia, we invited our guests to talk to them about what have been going on in their countries, and because many of them have been like directly involved in the opposition. So what we want to tackle tonight is more that activist or aspect of these agreements, and we want to answer the question, how come that these agreements actually manage to provoke such an opposition? So I'll introduce our speakers tonight. So next to me, Djordje Krivokapic. Djordje is a member of Shared Defense team, and he will be talking about how these agreements can affect our local situation with respect to internet freedoms. Then Renata Avila. Renata Avila is intellectual property rights and human rights lawyer from Guatemala. We know each other for quite some time now, and I'm really happy that you actually decided to participate tonight. Desiree Milosevic. Desiree Milosevic is like my colleague from the local ISOC chapter, but Desiree is also involved in more like global issues concerning internet governance. So I just mentioned a couple of affiliations, so Desiree, feel free to add something to it, but Internet Society Board of Trustees and Internet Society of the United Kingdom. Rysiek is an activist, also member of ISOC Poland, if I may put it that. Okay, not anymore, but yeah. Okay. Anyhow, Rysiek, you've been engaged when it comes to these agreements a lot, so we will hear a lot from you on the subject, how to organize across borders and what the issues are. And last but not least, Wouter van Holst. Wouter is from Netherlands. You are a member of a collective called, I'm going to try now, but you correct me, Vrijschrift. And Vrijschrift is a digital rights organization connected to EDRI. And so tonight you will be speaking in the name of European Digital Rights Initiative as well. So yeah. So after this introduction, maybe Wouter, we can start from you. And I will just ask you, when it comes to these agreements, what of these acronyms are concerned with Europe?
Do you have the slides?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay, Nicola. Yeah, can we get slides?
Well, since we're waiting for the slides, European Digital Rights is a pan-European umbrella of human rights organizations in Europe that are focused on human rights in the digital context. We have about 28 members in 19 European countries, and we define Europe as the Council of Europe. So not necessarily the European Union, but also we do have members outside the European Union. We have a member in Macedonia. We will have observers from Turkey. Share is an observer. And what we do is, on one hand, we represent, among other things, internet freedoms both in the Strasbourg and Brussels gremia. I mean, the Council of Europe is seated in Strasbourg, and of course the European Union mostly takes place in Brussels. So there's an office there with several people who do policy analysis, talk to European Parliament, talk to members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and so on. And at the same time, we try to network among ourselves and have shared action. We do have. But
need to go up now, obviously, so you need to instruct them to.
Okay. Well, basically, what I tried to as a little bit of an intro, and we didn't have the opportunity to talk to all panelists beforehand, but please, other panelists, do interrupt me if I'm being stupid or you know more about it, which probably is true, is basically want to touch briefly upon which trade agreements we are talking about, why they're actually are being negotiated or have been negotiated recently, and what are the topics that are relevant, well, A, to Serbia, and B, what are the topics relevant to our fundamental freedoms that are being affected by those. Can I have the next slide, please? Basically, the background is that for quite a while, a lot of trade liberalization was happening at the United Nations level in the World Trade Organization, but especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, the BRICS countries started to become more opposed to, let's say, the OECD members, basically mostly Europe and the United States. BRICS. Oh, as in BRICS, as in, sorry for using the lingo. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. That is good point. Sorry. Was that okay?
No, S has to be for Serbia.
No, Rysiek was suggesting that the S is for Serbia, but I thought it was just the A in the case as in the multiple. Either way, that's part of the issue, that especially the United States is no longer getting its way unopposed in the traditional trade organizations, and is now engaged in several multilateral or sometimes bilateral trade agreements to still shape the world in the image it would like it to be shaped into. And the other bit is China is being used as the bogeyman. It's being literally said by people like European members of the European Parliament, if we do not have these trade agreements now, we will have to strike deals later with China, and China will take human rights into account to begin with. So better take this deal than any worse deal we'll have in the future with China. China is really considered the big reason for all this. But I'm sure Renata can at some point tell more about it.
So what's missing maybe on this slide is G77 countries, which are developing countries, including China, protecting their economic interests that deal within UN nation system.
Yeah. By the way, this was also the reason why ACTA, the anti-counterfeiting trade agreement, again, trade between quotes, was being launched, because especially China and India tend to oppose further export of, let's say, the European and US approach to intellectual property rights, for very good reasons for the most part, I would say. And you could roughly say these trade agreements are about a continuation of the so-called Washington Consensus, the rough idea of the liberal democracies sharing the same values and trying to expand them across the world, including free trade, with both their up and down sides, with the US at the front of everything there. I'm not entirely sure whether the Washington Consensus is worth preserving to begin with, but yeah, let's go to the next slide. In order of how final or complete they are, the first one is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You'll see in, well, let's say orange for my colorblind eyes, all the members of that. And because this map is stupidly Eurocentric, you won't notice, but it's mostly encircling China. It's all the Pacific Rim countries except China and Russia, and they're technically potential members to TPP, but I don't think anyone with a straight face will say that they would ever become members of it. TPP is completely negotiated, it's final, it has been signed, it is in the process of being ratified. But interestingly enough, Trump has said he won't ratify it, so TPP may actually be that. But it covers a very wide range of topics, and we'll get back to the issues about those so-called trade agreements, but they're not necessarily about trade anymore. May I have the next slide? Then we have CETA, that's the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, and that's actually one of the more honest names of these agreements, because it's very comprehensive, and it is economic. It is close to a proto-economic union between Canada and the European Union. but it's mostly not about trade. What is, and it's briefly mentioned before, this would be a trade agreement Serbia would be joining into if it were to join the European Union, which I still think Serbia hopes to do so at some point. And by extension, it will also affect the European Economic Area, which is Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein, and Andorra. Then there's also the issue of Brexit. That's an interesting one, how Brexit will affect this. But I would not be surprised if Canada were to take the position if the UK leaves the European Union, that they just want to have a new deal with the UK, because it's a much weaker negotiation partner than the European Union as a whole. Basically, CETA has been more about exporting European Union ideas to Canada than Canada being able to represent its interests with as much strength as the European Union or its perceived interests has done. Next slide, please. Then the least known of all, but possibly the most interesting one for internet freedoms, is the Trade and Services Agreement. And this is again one of those very multilateral ones, and we have been toying a bit with the colors, but as you can see, it is most of Europe, bits of Latin America, but Australia is in there, and even strange outliers like Pakistan, and Israel is also on the map. And this touches upon topics like financial services, but also telecommunication services, and then it gets interesting very quickly. So, next slide, please. The last one is TTIP, but it's actually probably in Europe the most well-known one. Again, transatlantic trade and investment partnership, and it's more about investment than about trade. It is in the negotiation, but the negotiations haven't been going well even before the US presidential election. There's just an awful lot of topics they're in deep disagreement about. And there's also the issue of, like CETA, it also covers agriculture products. And then you run into issues about environment, animal welfare, and food safety, because the US has a very different approach to all these topics than the European Union has. The European Union has on its wish list so-called geographic indicators, so you can't call it champagne if it doesn't come from the champagne, even though it's just a sparkling white wine, and may actually taste better than champagne. But and that's something the US really doesn't want to have. There is the standardization on automotive manufacturing, and then the Volkswagen scandal hits in because the European car manufacturer had been cheating on emission standards, which is a lovely little topic on its own. TTIP may be dead or may just become a zombie that will haunt us later on down the line. It's probably not the most urgent one on the list. May I have the next slide? And this is roughly, from my perspective, are the main issues, but I would really welcome the other panelists to interrupt me. And by the way, one overarching issue is not mentioned on this slide at all, but I should begin with it. All these agreements are called trade agreements, but are in fact mostly about non-tariff related trade barriers, basically regulation, but are nonetheless negotiated in complete secret, or have been negotiated in almost complete secret. And for example, in the case of TTIP and CETA, even the negotiation mandate to the European Commission was, in the case of CETA, and still is negotiation TTIP on behalf of the European Union, their negotiation mandate was secret. And that in itself is a massive problem from a perspective of democratic accountability, at least in my opinion. For the most part, they are called about non-tariff barriers, but that's a euphemism for any form of regulation that doesn't really mean an actual tariff. I mean, almost any form of regulation does impact trade and is therefore an impediment to free trade. This is the whole term non-tariff barrier is in itself a free trade extremist label. And I think only libertarians would agree with the idea that any form of regulation might be inherently bad for the economy. Other massive issue is our so-called investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms. These are basically separate court systems for investors who feel they have been expropriated by the state, and they have their origin in the decolonization era, but now have been subverted into something very fascinating with, for example, to give just one example, Australia introduced a law which said you cannot have tobacco branded cigarette packages anymore, so-called plain packaging. So in Australia, you're no longer allowed to sell cigarettes in the branded packaging. And the idea is that basically they want to decouple all the glamour in the marketing of tobacco from the actual harmful. From a public health perspective, this is all meant to have less people smoking cigarettes, which I think is a good idea.
Careful, you're in Serbia.
Yes, I have noticed that smoking is more common than in some other parts of Europe than Serbia. Nonetheless, given the incidence of lung cancer and all that, from a public health perspective, is a good reason. Well, Philip Morris first went through all the courts in Australia, lost, and then did a nice piece of forum shopping, went to Hong Kong, well, transfers the trademarks to a Hong Kong entity. Hong Kong and Australia do have a trade agreement with ISDS, and went to a private arbitration tribunal and sued Australia in the order of billions of dollars. And the threat of losing several billions of dollars to an investor in itself tends to have a chilling effect upon legislatures. And right now, Romania is under threat of a several billion ISDS lawsuit under one of those investment agreements, which was put into place shortly after Romania became, well, lost Ceausescu. For not passing a law allowing a mining firm to start a gold mine with a massive environmental impact. So basically, the Romanian parliament is being blackmailed with a lawsuit outside the normal court system in the order of billions, unless they pass a law. Basically, we would be very sorry to have to sue you for several billions. I mean, Romania is not a rich country that cannot afford that kind of expenditures. Another big issue, to me at least, is this notion of regulatory cooperation. Well, TISA less so. TISA is kind of an exceptional one in the list, but CETA, TTIP, and TISA and TPP have mechanisms in there for so-called regulatory cooperation, basically meaning we have some commission between all the parties to this agreement. We will discuss legislation among each other within the countries that are party to this agreement. Basically, they are putting a new legislative entity on top of their own constitutional structures without parliamentary accountability there, which to me is anathema to this notion of democracy and the rule of law. And then we have a separate slide about internet freedoms being affected. And after that, I will try to shut up. There's expansion of intellectual property rights and also expansion of enforcement. CETA contains several provisions that are almost copies of some ACTA provisions. It's the same for TPP, and we know it's also on the agenda for TTIP. Net neutrality may be affected. There's some texts in the last leaked versions of TISA. Yesterday there was another leak of TISA that are way less strong than net neutrality provisions as they are currently in the European Union. By the way, is everyone familiar with the term net neutrality? Who is? Can I see you have? That is not a majority. Maybe it would be good, Aranđel, if you were to explain net neutrality or?
Net neutrality, yeah. Like in Serbian, like you want to explain? Okay, mrežna neutralnost je princip koji onemogućava, dakle to je zapravo i iza mrežne neutralnosti se nalazi ideja jednakosti i čitava ideja je ta da internet service provider ne treba da ima pravo da na neki način, na bilo koji način utiče na protok, da bira koje će informacije ići brže, koje će informacije ići recimo u nekom sporijem ritmu. So that would be in a nutshell. I think it's...
Yeah, that will be the very short version. Personal data flows are on the agenda. Basically, this in the current mechanisms, if you process personal data, meaning data relevant to a person's privacy, you cannot do that outside the European Union unless there's an adequate protection level recognized by the European Union, and that is put in there for the simple reason: if the European Union has high levels of protection of privacy, but the US doesn't have to, all European businesses would simply shift their operations to, for example, the United States and not have to bother with this protection of human rights under EU laws. TPP already contains a ban on any impediments of data flows, which is very interesting because some TPP parties already have adequacy decisions from the European Union, which should have to be revoked as soon as TPP comes into force. It's in CETA, so between Canada and Europe, there will be no longer this ability to prevent jurisdiction shopping, so to say, for data protection. And the US really wants it to have it in TTIP, because this is a major potential source for a new trade war between the European Union and the US. All the ideas about privacy, like Europe has, because of the Holocaust, because of Soviet oppression later on, that's not historically shared by the US. There's a very different cultural approach to privacy there. The US wants, in the name of interoperability, encryption standards in TTIP, but as far as the internet community understands it, it means mandatory weak encryption standards so the NSA can break them more easily. That's at least our understanding of it. There's also interesting bits about bans on requirements to publish source code for code in at least proposed in TISA, and there's some of that in TPP as well, which doesn't really mesh well with ideas that some parts of government software should always be open source, which some of the EDRI members are very much in favor of, including the one I represent. And the TISA leaks of yesterday shown that some parties to the TISA negotiations want to introduce a immunity for internet companies that put in filters to prevent offensive and harmful speech, which basically means, yes, companies, please do censor away and nobody can sue you for that causing a problem. So that's roughly the overview I wanted to give. Okay.
Okay, microphone. Got it. Okay. Walter, thank you very much. Yeah, you kind of covered a lot of different subject matters, and I thought it was really important to actually reveal all these to the audience and to us, so we can now maybe go into some details and discuss something that we think are maybe the most important, or that we feel like. So I would like to invite Renata, maybe because Walter was talking about TPP. So maybe you wanna. So I would like to know what's your take on the subject, because I think actually Walter put some more stress on European context, but we are also interested in knowing how are things going concerning this area, like Trans-Pacific?
So first of all, it's a very interesting day today for me as Latin American to be here sharing these thoughts on solidarity, sovereignty, independence, because Fidel Castro died, and it is absolute polarization at the moment in Latin America, and also a polarization US Latin America that you can follow in the news, in the narrative, in social networks, and everywhere. And it is, of course, it is a very interesting moment for the world, but for Latin America, it's even more interesting because we are close to the situation and close to the reality. And why am I starting with this? I am starting with this because, I mean, this has been a year full of turbulence for the world and for the spaces of civil society, of thinking people who care about humans more than about profit, and thinking people who care about the planet more about their stuff and gadgets and so on. It has been, I think that everything took us by surprise. We were like, as being the minority, sadly, we have limited resources, limited time. Most of the people who care about public interest and that kind of things, many of them do it in their spare time. And as jobs become more demanding of our time and life becomes more like hard for everyone around the world, this surprise, it is both an opportunity, but also a very, very dangerous moment that we are like facing. Like basically at the beginning of the year, the prediction was like, first this Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty will be approved by Obama and will be the victory and the consolidation of the governance regime. I don't want to call it the trade regime, the governance regime that US wanted to impose in the richest economies, not only the richest economies, but in if you look at the map of the TPP, I don't have a visual, but it is great. It is yeah, sure, but it is like close to China, close.
TPP map.
Yeah, close to lots of interesting resources that will be like key for the future. So it is not disconnected to military operations. It is not disconnected to the crisis that climate change will bring that is just around the corner. So now that it collapsed, it left us, okay, what's next? And well, if someone who wants to build a wall and create a registry of Muslim people in the US is celebrating and is saying like, we killed this treaty, I mean, lots of naive people celebrated and said, yes, we did it, TPP is dead. I touch base with different experts that monitor this topic on issues of health and public health, on issues of environment, and on issues of access to knowledge. But health issues are very relevant, even more than our digital topics. I mean, access to medicines and that kind of things. And they are terrified. They are terrified because these sectors that TPP was intending to protect are the ones generating more revenue and jobs to the US. And this make America great again. I mean, the World Trade Organization already has a pretty aggressive set of rules that protect all sectors in a preferential way of the US. And our fear is that instead of focusing in new deals and even more protectionist deals, they will start enforcing the ones that they already have. Because so far, okay, they have activated some disputes and they have done some big cases for big corporations and sectors, but they haven't fully used what is already there. And the second threat that I'm very, very afraid of is the bilaterals. Bilaterals that if a multilateral treaty is already secretive and is already like, is already a lot of favors and a lot of lobbying and a lot of dodgy stuff going on. If it is one by one, I mean, what I am worried not only about what the big actors and the big players can do at this moment when the world is more at the far right, but I'm also very, very worried about what will happen with countries without a bilateral with them. And because, I mean, Serbia is quite decent sized economy, for example, but if you compare it with the size of the economy of Germany or other big economies, I mean, your ability to negotiate a treaty with the US under Trump. It will be your oligarchs basically getting the best deals possible. And I can say it with confidence because that's what happened with Central America, a negotiation of a small treaty where all were weak parties, except maybe Costa Rica, who had like more or less capable negotiators. Starting from that point, I mean, do you have enough public interest negotiators that will take care and will make sure that the interests of your country will be represented? We started by lacking those and hiring those from the lawyers that are advising the companies that will get the most of the benefit out of it. That's one of my first worries. Like absolutely, like it is somehow civil society and academia and public interest groups were prepared to deal with the big negotiations, because what happened was, for example, Guatemala has no one, like literally no one who can analyze some of the topics. Like it's the same with Peru, it's the same with many countries. But you will find, for example, the New Zealand civil society will have someone who was very, very good at tech. Or you will have in Chile someone who's really, really, really good at one topic. And it was like collaborative dynamic on how to deal with these issues of civil society. One by one, I mean, the world is very different at the moment. It's very like, you know, fragmented in a way. And everyone is like going back to this nationalism. So if the US in the negotiation is kind of screwing Spain or screwing Serbia or Montenegro, the neighbor would not care. I would say like, oh, that would not happen to me, you know. And at different time, different topics, like divide and conquer, right? That's my first worry. And my second worry is the speed. I think that the administration of Donald Trump, the administration of potential administration, hopefully not of Le Pen, they will do the things, they know that they have a limited time. In the optimism levels, they will have 4 years before social collapse. So they will try to get as many things done as fast as possible. And I see it also looking at my region and how things happen in Latin America. I mean, we have been dealing with mini Trumps for a long time. So like that's doing business, maximum profit, privatization of everything at a record time, and that's it. So that's my second worry. But there's always a little ray of hope. And the little ray of hope is, okay, yes, the situation is looking really, really, really bad. But like at this moment, I think there is a matter of survival. And the networks that were like created with this long time negotiation of the TPP already still exist, you know, like it's still the connections. I mean, this horrendous long negotiation gave the opportunity of people, at least of the Pacific, to connect to each other, civil society to connect to each other, to know each other personally. And I think that build relationships and understand topics. I mean, it was a 5-year training on very complex, not only trade issues, but this privatization of justice that is happening, and many, many other issues. And the challenge right now, not only on internet issues, but on these like macro issues of superstructures is to, I mean, if we were looking for the opportunity to create a new international movement that was, I mean, we have one planet and we need one, like a unified solution to deal with many of the really serious issues ahead. We have one internet as well. So this is the perfect opportunity. And unlike our issues that are like sometimes really, really like elitist and really, really spatialized and disconnected from the, so far from the left agenda or from the social justice agenda, I think that the issues that the TPP touched are more connected with the realities of people. So it's a perfect opportunity to transform this fear, paralyzing fear that I have seen everywhere, into the opportunity to build a movement and a minimum common positive agenda. But here is another warning, because it is really easy to oppose and to act according to a timetable that states establish for us. I see it all the time with the European Union, you know, like it is, I see activists like hamsters, you know, and the EU powerful people looking at the hamsters are so cute. They, okay, we will pass this law here. Okay, they will make the protest here. Yes, we ask this, but we really want this. So they will protest here, and we will get what we want. That's the EU that I see. I mean, I have seen very few big achievements, of course, because sometimes the rule, sometimes you can hack the system, but not always. So I think that right now, because everyone was like, oh, what is going to happen? No one knows. And literally, not even the president of the most powerful nation knows, as we can see. And it's the perfect opportunity to create our positive agenda and to create what we want and to articulate it well and not be overambitious, but to have, at least as a global society, have one or two victories and to dedicate time and dedicate efforts to make it happen. I mean, it can be in different issues. It can be one single issue. We need to figure that out. We have the tools now, and I think it would be stupid not to do it. And that's the message that I want to convey. But the last thing, and promise the last, is also I am very frustrated at, because I was looking at history, you know, and how the revolutions in Latin America happened and how the citizen revolutions happened later after the Condor operation and all of that. And we didn't need Soros to put money on the bucket to make things happen. I mean, we didn't need fill applications of grants to the European Union to make things happen. I mean, I think that it's so critical the moment that we are at the moment, right now, as a global society, that it is up to us to dedicate an extra time, an extra mile, turn off the television, close the laptop, and sit down and say, okay, I can contribute with this, and I will commit and will be disciplined to make the project that I want to happen. Because yes, it is nice and cute, as I said, with the hamsters to be with the things in the protest, but we need to be smarter than that, and we need to be very fast. And as Serbia is a very privileged place in the planet, I mean, you have so many people who attended school and university, and with that privilege of education comes big responsibility. And I think that it also is an opportunity of leadership for a new leadership and open spaces for people who have time. And I'm thinking of students and academics that usually write in useless papers that no one is going to read, to address problems that will happen, like maybe, and to take a decision of choosing a period of time, 5 years, okay, 2 years even. We will make this. And we will make this good.
Wow. Thank you, Renata, for this really thorough presentation of TPP and global situation with respect to theoretical problems we are facing, but also with respect to some practical issues we have. So, and I'm pretty sure that till the end of this debate, we will be able to go in some of this in greater detail. Yeah, I would like to ask Desiree Milosevic if you could contribute to this topic. Maybe if you can remind us of what was going on before these trade agreements, because Renata actually mentioned that even though one trade agreement is set aside, that doesn't actually guarantee much.
Let's see if this works. Yes, it does work. Thank you for that question, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to make maybe a more general comment about these trade and economic trade agreements, and focus more on why they're important for internet users' freedom, rather than talk more generally, since I'm not an economist and I don't think we have an economist on our panel. I think it's important to know that the topic of internet always gets involved in these trade agreements because the internet is one that is promoted as the essence of social and economic development for any country. And that's how some parts of the internet question and reason gets involved in this agreement. So to go back maybe 5 years ago, we had the ACTA agreement in 2011 that was signed, the anti-counterfeiting trade agreement. And there's been a lot of opposition because of, especially in some intellectual property rights, which were quite that developed quite severe tools that will somehow affect internet users and their freedoms, privacy, and the freedom of expression. So I think whether we talk about the transatlantic partnership, whether we talk about any of the ones we covered here, TISA, which seems to be more severe than TPP in some aspects of data protections. It really weakens users' data protection. And the most recent one, CETA, that we mentioned, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement between Canada, European Union, that was just signed 28 days ago, on 30th of October. I think we see in all these agreements one thing that is in complete violation, how the internet public policy should be made. If we look at the principles of the public policy making that involves any digital environment and digital freedoms, we should have an open public participation. It should be a duty to promote these issues. On the contrary, these trade agreements are mainly negotiated between businesses and governments. And if you were to look at the percentage of stakeholders that have participated in this negotiation, I think in 92% of CETA negotiations, there were present only businesses and governments, and very little of other stakeholders, the internet technical community, which could have provided a very good advice, the scholars and academics, civil society, consumer rights protection organizations, and other internet associations. So I think we're seeing this general, if you like, neglect of promoting public interest, and we had to learn about most of the contents of these trade agreements from WikiLeaks, because some of these annexes, especially the financial ones, became public only through some of the leaked documents. So there's this cloud of secrecy and in negotiations that is really in violation how the internet public policy should be made, at least with issues that pertain to the internet. And those we have heard also from Walter, that could affect net neutrality issue. We have a very good regulation in the EU. And now Serbia, which is not even a part of the EU and may join EU, would equally be affected with CETA agreement, with ACTA agreement that has been signed in 2001, and we would really need to see how that would affect our trade and our economic situation. So I'll stop here, just can have maybe a discussion and also hear from the audience and open up a panel.
Yeah. Okay, but before we turn floor to the audience, I want to ask Rysiek, because Desiree, you just mentioned, you just mentioned, you were talking about that democratic deficit that somehow surrounds these agreements. And I was going to ask Rysiek two things, so you can, The first thing is Walter talked about ISDS mechanism. So maybe you want to tell us something about that, and if you have some practical ideas how to organize, or maybe some experiences to share, about that, which will be something in line with what Renata, talked
Yes. So first of all, I would like to thank Walter for his introduction into this topic. That was a very helpful thing. Deficit is not the word I would use. It's a very mild word, I think, but the words that I would use probably are not very parliamentary, so I will not use them. So where to start? If you have, I mean, from my perspective, when you have countries, states, democracies, I would like to think about them. You can, if you're negotiating something, like if you're negotiating an international deal, I think it would be safe to say that you can have one of the two things. You can have either secrecy, because it's a trade deal, you know, you're negotiating, so you might be negotiating a trade deal with somebody else, so you have to have secret, you know, whatever, tariffs or whatever. Or you can have a deal that actually influences local laws very deeply, right? You cannot have both. And all of these trade agreements, quote unquote, have a lot of ways of influencing local laws very deeply, right? And they're trying to remove, like to make it seem like they're not there. It's like they're not using clear language saying no country shall do anything without the agreement of, I don't know, WTO or the agreement of whomever. But obviously this is where it leads, right? Because, for example, because of ISDS. So ISDS for me is a very interesting, so ISDS for me is a very interesting thing. I don't remember the exact acronym. Do you remember the exact acronym of ISDS?
Yes. Investor state dispute settlement.
Thank you. Investor states dispute settlement. Yes. So this is a thing that showed up right around, as you said, when communism was crumbling and et cetera, and the whole colonialism. Sorry. So the idea was that we have new states that maybe some investors want to invest in, but they're afraid of investing in those new countries, new states, because the governments are changing. You know, they might go communist or something. I don't know. And what happens when a state where you invested as an investor suddenly nationalizes your company, right? Your investment in that country, right? You lose your investment, you lose your money, so you don't want to invest. So this idea is that basically if a company feels that their investment is somehow infringed upon by a country, they can take that country to court. And I put quotes around the court because the word court here is very problematic. But I'll get to that in a moment. So this for me is an impossible proposition. I mean, think about that, right? The idea is that if, I mean, it's supposedly defending businesses from loss of their investment in case a local government does something bad. But that relies on the rule of law, and this is the first thing that goes out the window when a local government starts doing something bad. So how is it supposed to even work? And then somebody will say, well, you know, if the next government comes to power in that country, then they will start perhaps adhering to the rule of law, adhering to their treaties, and then paying back whatever the arbitrage, the ISDS arbitrage told them to pay to this company that lost this investment, right? But that means that once this, let's call it more sane government comes to power, then suddenly they're saddled with debt that they have to pay back because the previous government made some decisions, and they cannot get out of this vicious cycle, because then the economy goes down the drain, and then the next not really sane government comes to power, and then the cycle repeats itself. And in the meantime, how the ISDS actually works in the real world right now was this was a very good example from what Walter was saying. Australia had a real problem with tobacco regulation, right? Because the company, the Philip Morris Corporation, was it? Yes, the Philip Morris was able to basically forum shop. So they said, okay, we lost in Australia, so let's move some of our rights to our branch in Singapore or to our branch in Hong Kong. And since there is an ISDS agreement between Hong Kong and Australia, we will sue Australia from Hong Kong. This is A, not something that a country can do. B, Fun fact, countries cannot sue corporations under ISDS. This is a very one-sided instrument. This is basically putting corporations, being large multinationals in a very privileged position, as opposed to to countries, as opposed to democracies, right? So this is highly problematic. And I said before that I don't want to use the word courts, because if you hear the word courts, you think of a judicial system in a country, you know, one of the branches of the system, and you know, it's somehow democratically controlled to some extent, and you have procedures and you have transparency and you have all of that, which you do not have in case of ISDS. For example, an arbiter working with ISDS tribunals can be a person representing one of the sides in one proceeding in one case, and then once this case is over, he can go and become the judge in another case, right? Which is an obvious conflict of interest immediately, right? Because how can you have a system like that? And the best part is that there's literally no transparency. For example, the people in Poland are activists, my friends, who are trying to build a coalition against TTIP, and they're succeeding actually in Poland. They were trying to get any information about how many cases against Poland have been brought in ISDS arbitrage proceedings, and how many of them Poland has lost, and how much money did Poland have to pay. Impossible, right? And this is, I mean, think about it. This is money coming from my pocket and from pockets of any other Pole, right? This is coming from our taxes. So how the hell is it that I am not able to know how much I'm paying and whom am I paying and for what am I paying? I don't have that knowledge, right? So this is something that boggles my mind. So there's another point to be made, a more general point to be made about these treaties, I think, and the comprehensive economic trade agreement is a very good example. The name that we stopped on for a moment there. I mean, if we want, maybe this is not a bad idea, right? Maybe this is not a bad idea in general to build a broad coalition of countries that have a similar worldview in some way. But if we are going to get into this endeavor, if we're going to get into this discussion, let's get into this discussion instead of masquerading it as a trade deal that just influences all the laws in all the countries that are part to it. That's just not how this should work. And let's just be clear about that, right? I'm okay with having this discussion. Maybe this is not a bad idea to have a union of unions, right? I mean, why not? Let's talk about this, but let's talk about this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, this was really helpful. Walter, you have quick intervention?
Very quick technical remark. By saying it's okay for trade agreements about tariffs to be negotiated in secret, that's actually already buying into the narrative. Under the WTO agreements, that was mostly about reduction of tariffs. Those were genuine tariff-reducing agreements, and you can still discuss to what extent that was a good thing or not. At the time, the anti-globalization activists were very much opposed to it, but most of that came through nonetheless. Even those deals, although they were mostly about tariffs, and there's indeed some valid reasoning about not necessarily having all of that in the open, even those deals were more transparent, with more stakeholder input, but also way more transparency than those current non-tariff related deals, which touch many more policy areas than those external tariffs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yes. So I'll just clear my name now. I'm not a fan of secrecy at all, right? But if we want to discuss any kind of, what I was saying is that if we want to have any kind of secrecy, right, we cannot have this overbearing influence on the legal system of countries involved or parties to the treaty.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. And now, we will hear from Djordje about the local situation. Even like as we noted from the beginning, Serbia is not like directly affected with those agreements, even though it is, and there is like huge like spillover effects. And then, yeah, maybe we can come up, or maybe we can like realize that there is some like common logic there. Well,
yeah. First, regarding the language, I decided to speak first 50% in English and then in Serbian. So
okay,
you can relax for now. Okay. So second thing, I'll talk about the local issues in Serbia. More about the same conflicts, but from different perspective, and the same transparency issues we are having. So for introduction, I'm here in front of the SHARE Foundation. We are a Serbian-based foundation fighting for public interest in critical battles regarding in intersection of society and technology, let's say like that. And the story I'll talk about is the story of last 10 days. So practically 10 days ago, a friend just sent me a Facebook message saying like, did you read the new IP strategy for next 5 years? There is a proposal. I was like, no, nobody knew anything about that. Somewhere on some obscure website, there was like a proposal on IP strategy. And yeah, intellectual property strategy for Serbia in next 5 years. And then we opened this proposal, and what we could see, practically it was completely unclear who wrote it, who decided what should be put inside, no reference to any particular group of people, only one person who is the chief director of intellectual property institution in Serbia. And then the focus of the document was completely related to the enforcement of intellectual property. The only relation to even EU integrations was a harmonization with EU enforcement directive and so on. So nothing else, 20 pages about enforcement. And there's like a bunch of new measures inside, starting with the takedown of websites, then filtering mechanism, then seizure of domain names, then creating an intelligent database about all the people who are maybe infringing intellectual property. And then on top of that, what is very interesting, access to data regarding financial transactions on the internet, with the focus on access of this data from Visa and MasterCard and other players, and at the end, ridiculously, but also all info on internet advertising and targeted ads on all the websites from the intermediaries, like from Google and so on. So that's the plan, to collect all this data, to block a lot of stuff and so on. So this is the moment when story is becoming interesting and you have to take the headphones, and I turn into Serbian. I onda zapravo ovako, gledate taj dokument, niti znate koga je napisao, niti znate čijem interesu služi, mislim, imate osjećaj, i prođete kroz njega i odlučite da ga obradite mašinski na neki način, da vidite da li se reč znanje pominje ili jedno, kultura, inovacija, bilo koja reč, javni domen, bilo koja reč koja je u bilo kakvoj relaciji sa javnim interesom. I na 20 strana ne postoji nijedno podudaranje s ovim pojmovima, ne u celosti, nego i čak i delimično. Jedino se domen, kao javni domen, preklapa sa onim sižurom, odnosno zaplenom internet domena. To je jedina stvar koja se preklapa. Dalje, ne postoji apsolutno nikakva analiza uticaja jedne takve strategije na naša fundamentalna prava, prava koja su zagarantovana Ustavom Srbije, zagarantovana Evropskom konvencijom o ljudskim pravima i svim drugim dokumentima. Znači, ne postoji nikakav odnos prema relevantnoj sudskoj praksi, čak i u okviru Evropske unije, koja bi nekako ublažila tako jedan, da kažemo, opširan pristup izvršenju prava intelektualne svojine. Zatim, ne postoji nikakva cost-benefit analiza, odnosno ekonomska analiza, da li bi takve mere na bilo koji način doprinele Srbiji, srpskom društvu, našoj nacionalnoj ekonomiji, rastu brutonacionalnog dohotka, ili bi koštanje tih mera bilo mnogo veće od onoga koliko bi zapravo zaradili. I da skratim sad priču, mi smo ušli u to dosta duboko i u kontekstu organizovanja koje je neophodno, pokušali smo skupimo sve one aktere koji su mogli da se nađu zajednički za jednog komentara ovakve strategije, i to je od zajednice zaštitnika digitalnih prava preko internet zajednice, da kažemo, branioca ljudskih prava i građanskih prava organizacija civilnog društva u tom sektoru, IT preduzetnika, kreativnih industrija, organizacije koje štite potrošače i čitav niz drugih aktera, muzeja i biblioteka. Sve smo njih okupili na jedno mesto i izašli smo zajednički sa jednim dokumentom koji je duži i dosta ozbiljniji od same strategije, koji smo napisali kolaborativno na nekom Google dokumentu, nas 20 dok smo radili ostale stvari, i dosta ozbiljniji. Ali uspeli smo da izađemo sa zajedničkom agendom, to je bitno, i jako je bitno da razumemo da ako tu zajedničku agendu ne držimo, sve te organizacije zajednički, da će nas pocepati, razdvojiti, svakom će dati po jedan mali štapić i naša agenda će pasti. Ovo je samo jedan primer, ovo nije možda najbitnija stvar koju trenutno imamo, ali jeste jedna od jako značajnih stvari i jeste zapravo primer, ako delujemo zajedno, da ćemo napraviti neki uticaj, pošto smo već imali jako dobar feedback javnosti, institucije, ministarstva. Moramo da razumemo, ta strategija ne odgovara policiji, ona ne odgovara tužilaštvu, ona ne odgovara celom telekomunikacionom sektoru. Niko ne želi tu strategiju. Ali ako ne postoji reakcija, ako ne postoje akteri koji će se ujediniti, takve stvari će proći, takve stvari nam prolaze svaki dan. Tako da, eto, tu bi negde završio ovaj deo.
Ok. Hvala, Djordje. Thank you, Djordje. Yeah, I'll switch to English. So, yeah. I hope we managed to shed some light on this subject matter we've been dealing with tonight. So I would like to invite everybody who has any question to go ahead and ask. Okay, maybe I first, I should check the panel itself and see if people have questions to each other, maybe. Audience, yeah. Yeah, the call is kind of open, yeah, so. Yeah, I can. Yeah. We're not going to go anywhere.
Who shall we volunteer from the audience for a question? You have a question? Yeah.
I feel that everything's clear to me, so I don't have any questions, but I'm not worried. on which I won't elaborate.
Čekaj da pitam ako ovaj TPP sporazum je prekinut ili se prekida?
Samo tren da stave ljudi uređaj.
Pa ovaj TPP agreement,
Da.
ako se on prekinuo ili se prekida, kao zamenit će ga fair trade. Šta je to fair?
So what was the status at the moment of TPP?
Da.
Yeah.
Da li je on prekinut?
Okay. Yeah. Go.
On each country, like validating by the, like, you know, like the government negotiates a treaty, and it depends on the constitutions how it will become law, binding law locally. And US was going to fast track it and pass it, and it failed. Basically, it fell apart at the last minute. And that's in the US. In some countries, it's still like being discussed. But I mean, if US is not there, I mean, is declared dead at the moment. They were leading the negotiations, and it was in spite of all the mobilizations, in spite of clear constitutional clauses in many of the countries, absolutely conflicting. Usually in many countries, like the courts in trade matters get lots of pressure from all the powerful sectors and take a flexible approach and fail to protect the citizens, and even the European Court of Human Rights, actually. Yeah.
Was the question about TTIP or TPP?
TPP.
Okay, then.
And then is it replaced with something else?
Say again.
Is it replaced with something else?
Okay, but then if it was about TPP, I thought it was about TTIP, so it's okay.
It was about TPP, yeah.
And
the question is it replaced?
Yeah, like the replacement will be bilaterals, and also not only bilaterals, but they had already NAFTA, which is a North America Free Trade Agreement, negotiated, and CAFTA, CAFTA, that is with Central America, and other treaties in the world, and all the U.S. Trade policy will be renegotiated. So if at that moment, like the worry here for digital rights and all of these topics is if already, like, for example, World Trade Organization, the first round trips was like super protectionist and restricting our rights to access to knowledge, culture, and so on. Then the next round of negotiations that they engage in even more protectionism. I mean, not even me being able to copy a book, modifying the laws of everyone in these small countries. Now, renegotiation and re-examination of all that will update it even more to the technologies that we have today, and probably to the next 50 years, because they can predict now where technology is heading, and it is pretty scary.
And when it comes to TTIP, maybe,
Well, the difference between, there are many differences between TTIP and TPP, but one difference is the risk of bilaterals. If TTIP really falls apart, there's no risk for bilaterals under the current framework, because under the current framework of the European Union, member states cannot enter into trade agreements with non-member states. That's an exclusive competence of the European Commission to do so. That's, among others, one of the reasons why Brexit is such a fascinating thing, because the UK cannot enter into trade agreements until it has finished its exit from the European Union, which should take 2 years, but in all likelihood will take at least 10 years. So that particular risk is not specifically there. What I would hope for, but my hopes tend to be naive, is that if TTIP fails, that they will split it up in separate topics, and I think that will be an improvement, because in the current agenda, you will have so many items on the agenda, there will be tremendous political pressure, because I got this on automotive and you got that in agriculture. Oh, just let go of the bloody privacy stuff. Nobody cares about anyway. Apologies for the word. So if you split such a comprehensive agreement in similar parts, it's more likely to get to an equitable outcome, or less unlikely. But that may be very naive of me.
Okay. Okay. Is there any question? Okay, Desiree, I have a question actually for you, because you've been engaged with like internet governance for a very long time. Do you have any idea how like internet governments can, or tell us something about the way people who are like active in that field are involved with these subjects, or how do they get involved?
We just have an upcoming Internet Governance Forum taking place in Mexico. There will be 2 workshops on this particular subject, and maybe people can tune in and watch remotely. But more referred to some of the principles that all stakeholders have agreed. We have the so-called Net Mundial statement, which is quite specific, which says that all stakeholders should be participating in the policy making, and to the extent possible, all the processes should be open. But I just wanted to point out one thing, how to get this bridge between what we talked about today and what is a practical thing. And I think maybe it's important to mention that at the beginning of this year in Brussels, there are people that came together, industry scholars and academics and consumer rights activists, and they have something called the Brussels Declaration. And in this Brussels Declaration, they tried to somehow better cope with this, and the real product of that gathering was this so-called Open Trade Network platform. So if anyone is interested in following this, maybe one could look up the ODTN. And this is the platform that we actually be dealing with reform, how the trade agreements are going to take place or continue, the ones that we discussed today. So there's like a real outcome, and there's just a declaration which is difficult to enforce. Which brings me back to the nice internet governance principles we have and all the lovely declarations, but in reality, these are very difficult to enforce.
Okay, even though we will be having the like follow-up workshop tomorrow on how to organize and everything, but I was going to ask you, Rysiek, if you know some like good some examples of some good practices, how activists actually manage to raise awareness about the issue and oppose.
Well, it's a huge topic, and it's not easy to summarize that in 2 sentences. But I'll try. A few years back, just about 2 years before the whole ACTA thing, I think, happened, and right after telecom packet, the telecom package in the European Union, this was also a thing that the activists organized around or against. There was a talk by, I don't remember the name of this wonderful person, at the Congress in Berlin back then. And he proposed a very interesting way of using the word cyborg. So when you hear the word cyborg, you think of a person extended with technology, right? A person with a bionic, with a I don't know, camera instead of an eye, or some kind of robot hand, or that's a cyborg, right? You start off with a person and then add technology to it to create a cyborg. What this person, based on experiences of the telecom packet action, proposed is to think of a cyborg as like the other way around. Technology extended with people in the right places. And I think this is a very interesting way of looking, of looking at it. If you want to organize, you have all this wonderful technology. We have the internet, we have mailing lists, we have everything. We have every single tool we need to coordinate, cooperate, secure our communication, send information, etc., etc., etc. Right? We can use it. Right? We can start getting people. We can start extending this technology with people in the right places. And coordination, I think, is is the crucial word here. That's why organizations like EDRI are so important, right? Because you have those guys who sit there. Yes, those guys who sit there and watch all the things that are happening in the European Union and then flag the important things, the dangerous things. This is a service that is incredibly important, right? And going back to what you said about Soros and financing, et cetera, right? This is, I mean, I find the concerns about the activists being financed by this or that millionaire or. I know that's not what you said. Sorry? Yes, but this is exactly what I want to say, right? That I can understand where those arguments that, oh, Soros is financing all of this, that he has a hidden. No, I'm not saying you said that. I'm saying that these are the arguments I'm hearing because I work in an organization that is also partially financed by Soros. But I can understand those arguments, right? I do not like centralization, and I do not like centralization on the financial level also, right? I would like a more democratic way of financing activist work, but this is not, there's no way to do that right now, right? So the only way to do that in a way, otherwise than through Soros or through European grants or anything like that, would be to have a broad financing scheme for activists, for NGOs, where people who think that this is important actually do, I don't know, microtransactions or micropayments to support their NGO of choice. And I think this is something that we have to have a discussion about also at some point, because you can organize to some extent on activists and their adrenaline. I've been one and I am one and I will be one for a long time. But we activists also have to eat and sleep and get dressed. And I know I'm not very good at this last one thing, but we still have to do it, right? And unfortunately, money is the way to do it. And we have to find ways of financing activism, right? And this is also an important part of organizing.
Okay. And then Djordje.
It's related to that point. What I was trying to say is that we educated people with a level of expertise that is not the average. We have double responsibility, and I have seen it in different cases when a lawyer jumps in last minute, an engineer jumps in last minute, or some expert in food quality, for example. Sometimes, yes, it will be a weekend that I don't go out and I collaborate with the spaces that are doing this, and I use all my privilege and my knowledge and my expertise to contribute to something that will be defined like what my kids will eat in the future, what my country will the obligations that my grandchildren will have in the future. So that's the extra mile of responsibility that I was referring to. NGOs cannot pay those experts. Companies can. Multinationals can deploy 10 of those and produce 10 different points of view. So, yeah.
Just imagine going to IGF on activist wage. This is not going to happen. Right? It's an open forum. You can go there. You can take part in the discussion. You have to pay for the plane ticket from here to wherever it's happening. No. Yeah.
Maybe just to contribute on the same line, although we really live in an age of that we believe is really open for knowledge and information and everything, we still see the great gap between experts and people who understand what is going on and everybody else. And just to switch to economic side, then you have these experts, and you have a lot of them still in civil society sector trying to make some things better. But there is a huge risk that all of them will end up getting big salaries somewhere. They don't even need to go around and talk about it. They can just sit back home, do their work for big bucks. So that's really the problem we are seeing, and we have less experts because the intersection of different categories of knowledge is really high, and you need to put a lot of different methodologies and understanding to figure out what is going on. And when you do that from a civil society sector, you'll be approached, definitely. And that's like a big moral and ethical dilemma for everybody sitting on this table, how to figure out through that. And on the other side, to be honest, you have like project planning, fundraising, writing project, then doing something on a project, and then starting preparing reports, reporting, and doing a lot of administration. So practically, you do on the real stuff 20 to 30%, and everything else is the other stuff, which is not bureaucracy, which is not important. So it's really, really hard to see how we'll continue in that sense.
I would say that the biggest problem in activism right now is not the lack of expertise. It is a number of experts being very difficult and then forgetting that there's more than policy analysis and there's more than talking to the policymakers. What made ACTA a success from an activism perspective was there had been experts, mostly on their own dime, but some of them paid, agitating against it at the Brussels Fora and in Washington, D.C. as well. And at some point, people went to the streets in Poland, and these were football fans who felt that their unauthorized streaming of football matches might be in jeopardy because of ACTA. And having literally tens of thousands of Polish hooligans walking in the freezing cold is a much stronger political statement than any expert consultation paper will ever be. And you need both of them. And if I may quote a famous political philosopher, to each to their capability, we need people who can help communicate. We need people to inform. The privacy cafes and the crypto parties are a great way to give people a sense of agency of over their own freedoms, at least to get less of a feeling of oppression. The ideas have to be communicated. If you're a graphic artist but you're not into policy analysis, do still join, because there are a lot of ideas that have to be expressed. Just people talking to the family that these issues bother them, because a lot of people feel, oh, that's so niche, no one else cares about that. We need more than just the experts. We need a cross-section of society and a wide range of strategies and tactics to be effective.
Okay, like Rysiek quickly, and yeah.
Yes, shortly. So first of all, I would like to assure my friend here that they were not only football hooligans on the streets of yes, of course you do, on the streets of Poland. One of the most visible pieces of like transparents or banners was Pornhuba nie oddamy. We will not give back Pornhub. This is not a joke. This is the actual thing. But that aside, I agree that we have to kind of get the understanding of the issues and why there are issues and what issues are there to the people, because this is how it works, right? This is how democracy is supposed to work. People should decide, not some experts from one or the other side. I can agree with some sides of those discussions, but it's still the people that should make the decision. And I think, sketching a broader view, I think the things that are happening right now in Europe, in the US, with everything turning a little bit right, or a little bit is just a little bit, yes, understatement, are because there was not enough communication between the people that were making the decisions or thinking that they're making decisions and the people that the decisions were made about. So this is a great example is Obamacare, for example, right? Which is, in the end, it's a very good idea, but unfortunately people were not consulted, or people were not informed on how it is to be and why is it so important, etc., etc. And people elected a person that is clearly opposed to this idea, and this is a huge problem. So yes, kind of gluing those two layers together, like the expert discussion that is happening on some level of expertness or of some like technicalities, right? Mm-hmm. Very often, and then gluing it back, putting it on the kitchen table, right? Putting it on the tables of people that are actually there on the streets, in their houses. In a way, they can try to understand what's in stock. This is a huge work that experts alone will not do. And I agree with Walter here completely. This is something you can all help with.
Okay, do we have a question for the audience? Okay,
okay. So, could you tell more about the neutrality of network and its importance? You mentioned it, but could you tell it something more? Why is it important? The neutral network.
Net neutrality.
Net neutrality.
Who wants to?
Everyone.
Okay, Walter.
I can say like just in the part of the world, like net neutrality is it never took off because of the powerful lobby that telecommunications companies have. Telecommunications companies are the most one of the main actors paying the advertising on newspapers and online newspapers, and also bribing politicians all over, like many countries of the global south. So it never even happened. And
I think it was Ecuador who did that at some point.
No, it is Chile, and that's not developing country.
You're right. You're absolutely right. But the question was, why is net neutrality that important? Basically, if you control the network and you don't have net neutrality, any new service on that network without net neutrality needs a prior permission from the operator of that network, basically. If I'm the largest ISP of Serbia, and I happen to have my own search engine, I can give preferential treatment to my own search engine, and anyone else who wants to start a new search engine will either be given a less preferential treatment and being put in the back seat compared to, for example, the monopoly, the ISP own search engine. So the whole notion of net neutrality is actually older than the internet. For a long time, for example, you needed permission from telcos to use a fax machine. And you could only use terminal equipment provided by a telecommunications provider. At some point, that was liberalized, or yeah, that was, well, in Europe it was 1989, in the United States it was a bit earlier, but the idea of not being able to choose your own phone was something that the telco engineers found natural. Of course, you wouldn't get to decide what type of equipment you would use on their network. And they tried to stop fax machines for that. Basically, it stops any form of innovation on a network as soon as you stop having a form of net neutrality. So from an innovation perspective and a freedom of expression perspective, net neutrality is essential. And on top of that, on a modern packet switch network, you cannot, as soon as you accept you don't have net neutrality, you cannot enforce the preferential treatment of services without deep packet inspection and very intrusive surveillance by the telecommunication operator. So as long as you don't forbid the telecommunication operator through net neutrality to do so, you will have an incentive to intrude on your private communication. So that's two fundamental reasons: freedom to innovation, freedom of expression, well, and privacy.
Okay.
Yeah,
no.
Very well.
And the end game and what they've been talking about is operators charging termination fees for internet services, and that's where it all ends. So that's the next step after that, which is something that needs to be further explained by the panelists, because I wouldn't presume to do it.
Okay, now I realize that we ran out of time, so we need to finish here. Sorry, Rysiek, but we can continue this conversation tomorrow. Yeah, because I also need to give to reiterate practical information for tomorrow. So we will meet at. No, but we don't have time because of the space. So so tomorrow, well, all of you are invited to join us at noon. Well, there are some flyers like circling around, so you can see the exact address. So and we can like meet and continue this conversation tomorrow. There will be crypto party as well. And now after this event, there will be refreshment, so we can go and continue this conversation even now. So that's it.
Samo jedna kratka stvar, u ponedeljak u 6 u Starti centru Share organizuje Cyber Security Meetup, pričamo o implementaciji zakona o informacionoj bezbednosti, koga interesuje. Eto.
Ništa, hvala vam svima, bilo je zanimljivo, ja se nadam. Da.